The Texas sun had a way of flattening everything beneath it, the shadows, the fences, even the memories of war. By mid-morning, the air shimmered above the dirt roads like heat dancing on broken glass. It was August 1945, weeks after the German surrender, and the war's ghosts were still being counted, not just on battlefields, but in places the world had already forgotten existed. One of those places was Camp Hearn, a sprawling internment site tucked between cotton fields and cattle ranges 2 hours north of Houston. To outsiders, it looked like a peaceful ranch, wooden fences, pastures, windmills turning lazily under an endless sky. But inside the barbed wire, it held the last remnants of a broken empire. Over 1,000 German POWs, including 24 women captured in North Africa and Italy. They were nurses, secretaries, radio operators, none of them soldiers, but all marked by the same uniform of defeat. Lena Fischer, age 22, had once been a Red Cross nurse in Tunisia. She remembered the dust storms that painted everything the color of rust and the endless sound of trucks carrying men who would never return. When her field hospital fell to the British in 1943, she thought that was the end of her world. But there had been ships, trains, and then this, Texas. For months, the women worked in laundry huts and infirmaries. They mended American uniforms, washed linens, planted vegetables under the hot sun. Most guards ignored them. Some watched too closely. Rumors spread through the camp like wind through wheat. The men in nearby ranches were cowboys, real ones, with horses and hats and whips. To the women who had known only soldiers, that word sounded like myth. Then, one morning in late summer, the rumor became real. A whistle pierced the air. The women lined up outside the barracks, squinting against the glare. A sergeant, tall, moustached, and sunburned, stood with a clipboard. Behind him, a handful of men in wide-brimmed hats leaned on the fence. They wore boots caked in mud, not polished leather. Their eyes were calm, not cruel. "All right, ladies," the sergeant called, his drawl stretching the vowels like taffy. "You're headed to the north pasture for field work. Don't worry, you'll have help today." Help. The word meant nothing until the gates swung open. Through the dust rode 6 cowboys, real Texans, with reins in one hand and spurs glinting in the morning light. They weren't soldiers. They looked more like the heroes from storybooks the girls used to read before the war, except sunburned, scarred, and older. The women froze. Horses snorted, hooves thudded. "Mount up," the sergeant barked. "You're working alongside the ranchers today, helping mend fence lines. You'll get there faster this way." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the meaning sank in. Ride. They wanted them to ride horses. Lena's heart stumbled in her chest. The last time she'd been this close to an animal, it had been a mule pulling stretchers at the front. Now a tall bay mare stood before her, brown eyes glinting beneath a black mane. The nearest cowboy, a man with sandy hair and hands like weathered bark, nodded toward her. "Don't be shy, miss. She won't bite unless you bite first." Lena frowned. Ich weiß nicht." He smiled gently. "Then you learn." He offered a calloused hand. After a long pause, she took it. His grip was firm but kind, steadying her as she swung into the saddle. The leather creaked beneath her weight, and for the first time in years she felt something unexpected: balance. Around her, the other German women followed, awkward and uncertain, guided by cowboys who spoke slow English and slower patience. When the gates opened, the convoy of horses and riders moved out into the open Texas landscape. The bullet, hauled outside the fence, was larger than any of them had imagined. The prairie rolled endlessly, dotted with mesquite and cattle. The air smelled of dust, grass, and faraway rain. It was nothing like Europe. No ruins, no craters, no smell of gunpowder or fear. Only the steady rhythm of hooves and the low whistle of wind through the grass. The convoy spread out. Lena rode beside the cowboy who had helped her mount. His name, she learned, was Billy Carrington. 28, born in Brazos County, ranch hand since age 12. He'd been rejected from the army for a back injury, and now he helped with POW detail because, as he put it, somebody's got to teach the enemy what manners look like. At first, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't heavy, just unfamiliar. After half an hour, Billy broke it. "So," he said, tilting his hat back, "you ever been on a horse before?" Lena hesitated. Not since I was a girl." "Well," he drawled, "guess it's like learning forgiveness. You only fall a few times before you get it right." She laughed before she could stop herself. It sounded strange in her own ears, a sound she hadn't made in years. By midday, they reached the fence line where barbed wire sagged between old cedar posts. The women dismounted, stiff and sore, but alive in a way they hadn't felt since before the war. The work was simple but endless. They lifted posts, tied wires, hammered nails. Cowboys moved among them, correcting hand positions, showing them how to twist wire tight with a wrench instead of tearing their palms. Lena wiped sweat from her brow. Billy offered her a canteen. "Water?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Danke." He grinned. "That's thank you, right? I got a few words of yours too, like bitteschön." She smiled faintly. "You learn fast." He shrugged. "My mama always said don't call yourself educated if you can't say thank you in 3 languages." She raised an eyebrow. "And how many do you know?" He tipped his hat. 2.5. For the first time, the women began to relax. The cowboys treated them not like peasants, prisoners, but like workers or neighbors. There were no guns pointed, no shouting, no humiliation, only the slow, steady rhythm of labor and the occasional burst of laughter. When the sun dipped low, turning the grasslands gold, the convoy mounted again and began the slow ride back to camp. The air cooled, the sky stretched wide and pink. Somewhere far off, a train whistle blew, a sound that always made Lena think of home, even when she wasn't sure what home meant anymore. That evening, as the women sat outside their barracks eating cornbread and beans, Lena turned to Hildegard Schultz, her closest friend. "I thought America would hate us," she said softly. "They might," Hildegard replied, "but not here." "What do you mean?" Hildegard nodded toward the fence where the cowboys' horses were tethered. One of the men, Billy, sat on a log tuning a small harmonica. The melody that floated through the air wasn't a marching song or a hymn. It was soft, almost tender, like a lullaby for the defeated. "Maybe," Hildegard said. "These men never went to war. Maybe that's why they can still be kind." Days turned into weeks. The riding detail became routine, part labor, part escape. The women repaired fences, painted barns, even helped herd cattle under the open sky. Word spread through nearby towns. The lady POWs could ride as well as any rancher. For the locals, it became a curiosity. Farmers stopped by to watch. Some brought food, others brought questions. "They really Germans? They dangerous? Can they cook?" And slowly, suspicion turned into fascination, then respect. Lena began to pick up English phrases. "Howdy, thank you kindly, I'm fine, sir." Billy, in turn, learned German words. Freund, friend, Hoffnung, hope, Freiheit, freedom. He mispronounced most of them, but she corrected him patiently. One afternoon, as they rode side by side through a pasture douce, ted with sunlight, Billy pointed to the horizon. "That's freedom right there," he said, "not the flag kind, the dirt and wind kind." Lena smiled. "In my country, freedom was a word for speeches. Here, it is a color." He grinned. "Dust-colored, huh?" She laughed. "Yes, dust and sky." But not everyone approved. Back in camp, some officers complained that the German women were getting too comfortable. Others warned that fraternization could lead to disciplinary trouble. One night, the sergeant pulled Billy aside. "You're supposed to be guarding, not courting," he said coldly. Billy's jaw tightened. "I'm teaching people how to ride, not how to rebel." "Then keep it that way," the sergeant snapped. "Command's already nervous about how good they're getting with those horses." Billy didn't answer. But that night, he lingered by the fence, watching the barracks lights flicker out. Inside, Lena sat awake, staring at her calloused hands. Hands that once carried bandages, now rough from rope and wire. She wondered what it meant when an enemy started to feel like a teacher. A week later, a small incident changed everything. During a morning ride, one of the horses stumbled near a ravine. The young woman riding it, Annalisa, barely 18, lost her balance and fell, twisting her ankle badly. Before the guards could react, Billy was off his horse, lifting her out of the dust, barking orders in calm, steady tones. Lena dismounted too, kneeling beside him. Together they bound the girl's ankle with a torn strip of linen. The sergeant arrived moments later, shouting for order. "She fell! Get back to line!" Billy ignored him. "She needs rest and ice," he said sharply. "You want to write me up? Do it later." The sergeant hesitated, then muttered, "Fine." When they returned to camp, Annalisa was carried on Billy's horse, her hands gripping the reins, her tears mixing with dust. That night, the women gathered around her bunk, whispering in awe. "He carried me," Annalisa said softly, "like I was worth saving." Lena felt something shift inside her, not love, not yet, but the quiet beginning of trust. Days later, she found Billy near the stables, brushing down the bay mare. "You disobeyed orders," she said gently. He smirked. "Guess I'm not good at following bad ones." She studied him, then asked, "Why are you kind to us?" He paused, then said simply, "Because the war ended, Miss Lena. Someone's got to start acting like it." That night, under a sky scattered with Texas stars, Lena wrote her first letter in years, not to her family, not to her government, but to herself. "I thought captivity meant losing freedom. But today I rode a horse, and for a moment I forgot I was a prisoner. Maybe freedom is not a place. Maybe it is a feeling that others allow you to remember." She folded the paper carefully and tucked it beneath her pillow. Outside, the harmonica played again. Somewhere between the sound of hooves and wind, the world was slowly remembering how to be kind. The Texas wind had a voice, low, constant, and full of secrets. It carried the smell of hay, gun oil, and the faint sweetness of mesquite blossoms. By late September 1945, the women at Camp Hearn had learned to read that wind like a clock. It told them when rain was coming, when guards were in a bad mood, and when something new was brewing beyond the fence. That morning it carried unease. Lena Fisher felt it before she saw it. The sky had a pale white edge, like it couldn't decide whether to storm or shine. Horses in the corral shifted restlessly, their hooves thudding the dirt in nervous rhythm. Billy Carrington stood by the fence, his hat tilted low, chewing on a blade of grass like a man with thoughts he didn't want to say aloud. "What's wrong?" Lena asked, approaching him. Her English had improved. Each week of riding had smoothed the edges of her words. He spat the stem out, eyes on the horizon. "News out of town. Folks don't like seeing prisoners riding free. Word is some ranchers are stirring trouble." She frowned. "Trouble?" He nodded. "Ain't everybody here thinks y'all deserve horses? Some think it's insulting. Their boys died overseas, and now they got to watch the enemy play cowgirl in their fields." Lena went quiet. She had expected hatred when she arrived in America. She hadn't expected kindness, and now that kindness was turning dangerous for the men who showed it. Billy looked at her for a long moment. "You shouldn't worry none," he said finally. "We'll handle it." But she could see the tension in his jaw, a storm behind the calm. That afternoon, the wind shifted. A truck rumbled up the dirt road, stopping near the outer gate. 3 men got out, ranchers from town, rough-looking, with hard eyes and whiskey confidence. One carried a newspaper, another had a shotgun slung loose over his shoulder. The camp sergeant met them halfway, shouting, "This is restricted property!" But their voices carried, thick with anger. "We got sons buried in France, and you're letting the ones who caused it ride our horses, eat our food?" The shouting drew a crowd. From the corral, the German women stopped their work, their faces pale. Lena stood frozen beside her mare, her heart pounding. Billy stepped forward, his hat in his hand. "These women ain't soldiers," he said, calm but firm. "They're prisoners, not criminals. We treat 'em fair, same as we'd want ours treated." One of the ranchers spat on the dirt. "You call riding and laughing fair? You gone soft, cowboy." Billy's eyes hardened. "I fought my war right here, raising cattle and keeping my humanity. Don't tell me what kind of man I gotta be now that yours is done." For a second, the air between them snapped tight, pride, pain, and grief colliding in one brittle moment. Then the sergeant barked orders, and MPs arrived to escort the ranchers out. The commotion faded, but the unease stayed. That night, the guards doubled the patrols. The riding lessons were suspended until further notice. The next morning, the horses were gone, sent back to the ranch under new orders from headquarters. The camp fell silent. Without the rides, without the daily escape into the sun, the air inside the fences grew heavy again. The women moved slower, they spoke less. Even the laughter that had begun to return in whispers disappeared completely. Hildegard, Lena's closest friend, said what everyone was thinking. "They gave us the sky," she murmured one evening, and then took it back. Lena said nothing. She stared at her hands, rough, cracked, useless now that the reins were gone. But Billy didn't stop coming. Every few days he appeared at the fence line, pretending to fix equipment or check on the livestock. Sometimes he brought coffee for the guards. Sometimes he slipped folded notes to Lena under the fence post. The first one read, "I didn't want it to end this way. You were learning faster than any of the men I ever trained. Maybe that's why it scared them." The second, "Horses are just tools. What they can't take is the feeling you had up there. Remember that." She kept every note hidden beneath her mattress. 2 weeks later, an unexpected event broke the monotony. A small tornado had touched down 15 miles west, tearing through barns and fences. One of the local ranches, the same one that had supplied the camp's horses, was left in ruins. Billy arrived in a jeep, mud-splattered, breathless. "Sergeant!" he shouted, striding across the yard. "We need labor. The fences are down, cattle scattered. Headquarters gave permission for work detail." The sergeant looked uncertain. "Those orders came through proper channels?" Billy grinned. "They came through the only channel that matters, the one that keeps cows out of the road." An hour later, a group of 10 German women, Lena among them, were loaded into trucks with tools and rope. For the first time in weeks, the gates opened again. When they arrived at the ranch, the destruction was worse than expected. Fences lay twisted, a windmill toppled, and frightened cattle wandered near the creek. The sky had cleared, leaving everything smelling of rain and loss. Billy handed out gloves. "We fix what we can before sundown. Watch your step, ground's soft." Lena nodded, pulling on her gloves. The others followed, falling into the rhythm of labor they knew too well. They lifted posts, stretched wire, and tied knots. By afternoon, the work began to look like progress. The women were soaked with sweat and mud, but their eyes were alive again, that same flicker of strength that came from doing something that mattered. Billy worked beside them, hauling timber and driving nails. When Lena slipped on a wet patch, he caught her by the wrist. For a moment, they just stared at each other, breathless, muddy, alive. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "You always catch me." He smiled. "Someone's gotta." At sunset, they built a fire by the barn. Billy brought coffee. The women shared bread and dried fruit from their rations. The storm's destruction looked almost beautiful in the dying light, fences repaired, sky bleeding orange. A guitar appeared. One of the ranch hands strummed quietly. It wasn't a song of victory or loss, just something simple and human. Hildegard whispered to Lena, "Do you think they'll remember us this way?" Lena looked at the fire, then at Billy, who sat across from her, eyes reflecting the flames. "Maybe they'll remember that we were people, not enemies." That night, as the women were loaded back onto the trucks, Billy handed Lena a small package. "Don't open it till you're back in camp," he said. She nodded, tucking it beneath her coat. When she opened it later, under the dim light of the barracks, her breath caught. Inside was a small piece of polished wood, carved roughly into the shape of a horse. On its base, burned with a hot nail, were 2 words, "Ride free." She pressed it to her chest, eyes stinging. For the first time she understood what he had meant, that freedom wasn't given, it was remembered. Days passed. Then came an order from Washington. The German women were to be repatriated. Their names were listed, their files stamped. Within weeks they would be on ships bound for Bremen and Hamburg, cities that, by all reports, barely existed anymore. The night before their departure, Billy came one last time to the fence. The guards gave him a few minutes. "You'll be going home soon," he said quietly. "Guess this is goodbye." Lena stood on the other side, her hands gripping the wire. "What will you do?" "Keep ranching. Keep fixing things that break." He smiled faintly. "It's what I'm good at." She wanted to say something, to thank him, to promise she'd write, to admit how deeply those rides had changed her, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she said softly, "If the world ends again, promise me. You'll still teach someone to ride." He chuckled. "Darling, I've been teaching the whole time. Just took you to notice." They didn't touch. The wire between them was too high, too symbolic. But as he turned to leave, she called out, "Billy!" He stopped. "You never told me what freedom feels like, the kind that stays." He turned his head, the setting sun cutting his face in half shadow. "Feels like trust," he said. "And maybe, just maybe, like forgiveness." Then he walked away. The next morning, the German women were marched onto transport trucks bound for the port of Houston. The guards saluted briskly, the engines roared, and the camp, for the first time since its founding, felt empty. In the back of one truck, Lena held the small carved horse in her lap. When the road curved past the pasture, she saw Billy standing by the fence, hand raised in silent farewell. She lifted the carving, holding it up like a salute. The sunlight caught its edges, glinting once, like a promise reflected in motion. And though she could no longer hear his voice, she could almost imagine it on the wind. Ride free. Autumn, 1946. The ship slid through grey Atlantic waters, carrying what was left of an army that no longer existed. On deck, Lena Fisher stood wrapped in an army blanket, her hair whipped by the cold wind, the smell of salt and diesel thick in the air. In her hand was the small wooden horse, smooth from weeks of being held, its carved head bowed like it understood something about endurance. It was all she had left of Texas. All she had left of a strange mercy that had taught her, for the first time in her life, that kindness could come from the unlikeliest places, even from men who were supposed to be her enemies. When she stepped off the ship in Bremen, the sky was as grey as the ruins. The port city looked more like a ghost's memory than a homecoming. Bombed-out buildings stood like broken teeth, children scavenged in alleys, and the smell of smoke still clung to the air a year after surrender. Her mother was gone. Her brother, last seen on the Eastern Front, was presumed dead. What remained was rubble and silence. Lena rented a small room in a half-collapsed building. At night, she listened to the wind slide through the cracks in the walls and thought of the Texas plains, of the hum of insects, the warmth of the sun, and the sound of Billy Carrington's voice saying, "Ride free." But Germany was a place where freedom now meant survival. By 1948, she had found work as a nurse with a British-run relief hospital in Hamburg. Every morning she passed through the wreckage of streets where walls leaned like drunks and windows were patched with cardboard. The hospital treated everyone, German civilians, Allied officers, children born of war and hunger. One afternoon she was tending to a feverish boy when a package arrived. The nurse at reception handed it to her with a puzzled look. "No return address," she said. Lena opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph, yellowed, folded at the edges. It was of a ranch, and in the foreground, standing beside a familiar bay mare, was Billy. He was older now, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his smile was the same. Beneath the photo, a note written in rough handwriting read, "Fence is still standin'. Hope you are too. BC." For the first time in years, she laughed. A sound so sudden and alive it startled the patient beside her. That night she wrote back, "Dear Billy, I still keep the horse you gave me. It reminds me of a country that taught me forgiveness before my own country remembered it. You said freedom feels like trust. I am learning you were right. If you ever ride past the horizon, wave once for me." She mailed it to the ranch address printed on the back of the photo. Whether it reached him or not, she never knew. In the years that followed, Germany changed. The rubble turned into scaffolding, and scaffolding into homes. The Marshall Plan poured new life into old streets. But for Lena, peace still felt fragile, like a house built on thin air. Then, in 1953, a letter arrived bearing the seal of the Red Cross International Exchange Program. They were inviting former POWs to participate in a humanitarian visit to the United States, part of a goodwill initiative between nations once at war. Her breath caught when she read the destination. Texas. She landed in Houston on a spring afternoon, the air thick with the smell of rain and magnolia. Everything was bigger, the cars, the sky, even the kindness of strangers. She was assigned to a delegation touring former POW sites turned into training camps, but as soon as she had a day off, she took a bus north. The driver, a man with a slow drawl, didn't ask questions. "Where are you headed, ma'am?" She smiled faintly. "A place called Hearn." He chuckled. "Ain't much to see there. Just cows and sky." She looked out the window. "That's enough." When she arrived, the old camp was gone. The barbed wire had been taken down years ago, replaced by wheat fields and the faint outline of where the barracks had once stood. The guard towers were gone, but the wind still moved through the land with the same soft hum. She walked the perimeter slowly, boots crunching dry grass. Near the north pasture, she found the remains of an old fence, just a few posts leaning, half buried in earth. And there, hanging from one of them, was a small wooden sign. The paint had faded, but she could still make out the words carved deep into the grain. "Ride free." Her breath caught. She touched the carving, the same handwriting, the same letters. Billy had come back here. Maybe often, maybe just once. But he had been here. She followed the road that led toward the Carrington ranch. The gate was open. Horses grazed in the field beyond, tails flicking lazily. At the porch, an older woman looked up from her rocking chair. "You looking for someone, sweetheart?" Lena hesitated. I knew a man, Billy Carrington." The woman smiled gently. "Well, honey, you come a bit late for him. Billy passed on 2 years ago. Bad heart. He's buried up on the hill near the cotton trees." Lena's throat tightened. "I see." "You a friend?" the woman asked kindly. "Yes," Lena said softly. "From long ago. From the camp." Recognition flickered in the woman's eyes. "Oh, Lord, you're one of the German ladies he used to talk about." She stood slowly, walking to the porch rail. "He used to say the war gave him one good thing. It taught him how to forgive, and a German nurse taught him why." The woman pointed toward the hill beyond the stables. "He's up there. Go on, he won't mind the company." Lena walked the path slow, owly, her boots kicking dust the same color as memory. At the top of the hill stood a single oak tree, its branches spread wide over a simple wooden cross. The name carved into it read, "William Billy Carrington, 1917 to 1951. Ride free." Beside the cross was a small horseshoe, rusted and half-buried. Lena knelt, the Texas sun warm on her back. She took the little wooden horse from her pocket, worn, smooth, but still whole, and placed it gently at the base of the cross. For a moment she just sat there, listening to the wind moving through the grass, the same song it had always sung. When she stood to leave, a young ranch hand approached, maybe 16, maybe 17, the same age Billy must have been when he first learned to ride. "Ma'am," he said shyly, "you knew Mr. Carrington?" "Yes," she said. "He once taught me how to ride." The boy smiled. "He taught me too. Said riding was easy. You just had to let the horse forgive you every time you pulled the reins too hard." Lena smiled through tears. "That sounds like him." She looked out across the fields, the same golden expanse where once she had ridden as a prisoner, and felt, for a heartbeat, like a free woman. Back in Hamburg, years later, Lena would tell her grandchildren about Texas, about the strange place where enemies had shared coffee, where war had ended not with chains, but with reins. And when she died in 1985, her children buried her with a single small carving in her hands. A wooden horse, its head bowed, its surface still warm from the touch of a woman who had once been a prisoner, a nurse, and a rider. Epilogue. In Hearne, Texas, the old campsite is now just open field, but near the road stands a stone marker placed by local historians. It reads, "In memory of the German women POWs who found humanity here, and the Texans who taught them that peace can wear a cowboy hat." And beside it, some they once nailed a small wooden sign to a new post. It says simply, "Ride free."